and welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I am your host, Jackson Keller.
And Jackson has moved back to the place where his hometown, so his microphone quality should be fixed and ready to go for at least a week or two, hopefully.
A week, try maybe an hour. Let's hope we can make it through the end of this recording.
And editor Sean, if you've already said something in the beginning, how's it going? I hope everything went well. We'll see what happens.
Find out on the next exciting episode of Beating a Dead Horse, Z.
We're talking about scary stories to tell in the dark this week. We talked a lot about it last week with Hobbs and Shaw, actually. But, we're actually going to talk about it as opposed to just baseless conjecture. What did you think, Jackson?
So, for those of you who missed last week's episode, it was a good one. It was a fun one. You should go listen. But
you should also go watch Hobbs and Shaw. That was a good movie.
That was a good movie. And now we're just going to do the reverse. We're going to talk about Hobbs and Shaw in this episode the whole time.
Well, it's equivalent exchange, right? We took 5 minutes out of that to talk about this. Now we need to take 5 minutes out of this to talk about that.
I mean, you know what really would have improved Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark?
Calvin and Hobbes?
The Rock. Hobbs and Shaw in the dark. This movie was pretty good. I enjoyed it. I did not love it. There were a lot of elements that I thought were really cool. There were some elements. I mean, as usual, when it comes down to this sort of thing, for me, honestly, I think the pre-discussion you put it best, and that the movie's at its best when it's leaning into that hard PG-13 scariness, and the movie's kind of at its worst when it's going into the low PG-13 dialogue and character writing. Because the actual story and the ideas and the presentation are all very good and very clever. And it has themes on the mind, which is more than you can say for a lot of movies. But the way they're delivered, it's a little too obvious. A lot of it has the subtlety of a sledgehammer. And yet in other parts, especially when it comes to the visuals, there's a lot of fun, really well done stuff. So, I mean, a mixed bag, but overall an enjoyable mixed bag. You're not gonna reach into the trick or treat bag and see a big toe. You're gonna find maybe some Almond Joys, which you're not so fond of, but you'll eat them anyway.
Yeah, I think I really like this movie. And much like the phrase, I think I really like this movie, it's weaker in the first half. The beginning part of it, there's a clear-cut distinction between when things get creepy and when things are kind of interstitial world building. And in the first half, the creepiness works. The creepiness works all the way through. The scary story part of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark are very, very good. The interstitial stuff in the beginning is fine. It's not bad by any means.
It's pretty by the numbers.
Yeah, close your eyes. Imagine a PG-13 teen movie of bullies and kids from the 1960s, and voila, you have what the beginning of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is. It's fine. There's nothing it's not bad. There's nothing that I'm well, this part fucking sucked because blah 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 blah. It's there. You kind of accept it. It's a little slow. You wait for the horror to start up again, because when that starts up again, you're like, shit, this fucking rocks. And then about halfway through, there's a story that really kind of for me was the turning point, and then after that it got really good. And then there's a thing at the end that we didn't talk about in the pre-discussion, but that I want to talk about here that fucking sucked so much. And it's terrible, but there's it's a super short thing at the end that doesn't really impact the rest of the movie. So I liked it a lot overall, I think, because I still don't know that I feel that much about the first part. It has a lot of Chapter 1 feelings to it. It has a little bit of Stranger Things sprinkled in there. It has a lot of Del Toro horror movies. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty good, honestly. If you're looking for like a low-key horror movie to go see this Halloween, I'd recommend it. Like, if you're kind of in the boat of like, I don't necessarily want to be too spooky. I don't want that gross body horror stuff of, blood and guts everywhere, but I want something to give me a little, ugh. This is a good way to do it.
It's actually quite interesting. I was thinking a lot about the release date. This has come out pretty early in August, and I mean, I'm sure nothing's coming out in September. We were just making our schedule for the month ahead.
September is sad.
So, like, I'm sure it'll be playing. But it's weird to me that this didn't come out closer to Halloween. This is I'd overall still recommend it, but like this would be a much easier recommendation as a fun Halloween movie.
I mean, it's set during Halloween.
Yeah, so it's so strange that it came out in August. I mean, I guess by contrast, the October schedule actually looks pretty packed. So maybe they just wanted to have more of a chance since nothing ever comes out in August anyway. And you know what? There isn't that much else out at the multiplex this week. So if if you already saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, don't want to have horrible CGI lions in your face any longer, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a good antidote.
Yeah. No, it's real solid. And like I was thinking that too, actually, about the fact that it's coming out in early August. And part of me wonders if like the intention behind this is to have the DVD released by October, but that feels real tight.
Yeah, no, that would be a good plan. Although, maybe that would be pretty tight. That doesn't even give it a chance for like if it ended up being a runaway hit, they wouldn't be able to like make it in time because it'd still be running. Like it still has a chance to be running in October. So I don't know. Strange time to release it, but then again, maybe it is just a matter of not having any competition.
I mean, there is no competition. There's nothing out right now. So
before we dive into spoilers, I would like to introduce a new segment.
Okay. All right. Bring it on. What do we got?
So, as you may have discerned from the show, or if you follow me on my streams or anything, I have not only moved, I have moved home, as in back with my mom for a bit. And so, isn't that nice? My mom now is my current primary movie buddy. And so, she has a lot of feelings and wants me to share them with you, the good people of the internet. And so I will do that here. If you would like to hear more from my mom, straight from the horse's mouth, go watch the Princess Bride episode for both of our moms, in fact.
As I said, that's the mom episode.
So yeah, Autumn, this one's for you. What did Autumn Keller think of the movie? Well, she was hesitant about coming because she doesn't like scary movies. She is one who gets too spooked. And even told me before we sat down, like, hey, we don't really have anything else going on today. So I'll see this movie with you, but if it ends up being too scary, I'm gonna leave. And I'm like, okay, that's fair. Target's right around the corner. Go shopping, Mom. So, she did not leave. In fact, she only got up during the movie once, and specifically leaned over to me to tell me that she wasn't leaving and that she was just going to the bathroom. And that was when I knew that she was at least enjoying the movie. And she said that the scary bits weren't too scary, although she was like peeking through her fingers, and having her eyes closed during certain parts made it even worse, because she could hear what was going on without seeing it, and also she felt compelled to sneak a peek like through the fingertips. So overall, I think it's fair to say it was very effective for her, and she quite enjoyed the story as well. So that's the mom opinion of this week, and I'm sure that this will be a regular thing.
I'm so excited for Mom Opinion to be a regular thing. Like, Mom Opinion is the best fucking title for this. It's also a really nice kind of statement because we're snobs. We're fucking
We're
pretentious
such
assholes.
big snobs. And my mom is very unsnobbery. She's actively against movie snobbery. She just loves being at the movies. She just loves watching movies. So Autumn Keller really is the people's hero in that regard.
So there you go. From somebody who doesn't walk out of children's movies and go, well, that movie was trash. I can't believe the themes were so vapid.
She actually gave me a lot of shit for walking out of Lion King. She was like, really? Are you serious?
You snob. Oh. Well, I mean, is there anything we really want to talk about before we get into spoilers? I mean, we could talk about just, like, the general atmosphere of the movie, because, like, that's not really spoilery and also says a lot of high praise about it.
Yeah, because that's a lot of the best stuff, and I think, without going too deep into the details, like, talking about some of the structure and, like, adaptation stuff they did, I think that'd be fun, too.
Well, then let me kick it off by saying neither one of us have ever read these books. We were giant babies in grade school and stuck with our Goosebumps because Goosebumps are safe. And
Goosebumps, I remember that the first Goosebumps book I read had a silly kid getting eaten by grape jelly on the cover between two pieces of bread, and that's about the tier of scary that Goosebumps has.
Well, I will say I actually did stop reading Goosebumps for a couple of years because one scared me too bad.
You know what? I was so much of a baby that, like, I was much older than I reasonably should have been the first time I picked up a Goosebumps book. So Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark with its horrible zombie clown on the cover. No, thank you.
Yeah. So, like, this fucking movie does a really good job, even as someone who didn't read them. Like, I feel like some of the stories, watching it on, I feel like I had, like, maybe vague memories of flipping through one at one point because like
people would repeat the big toe to me. I remember like that was a popular one.
Yeah, there was a couple of them that kind of stood out, but like the atmosphere feels like the cover of one of those books. When it got scary, it felt like I was looking at one of those covers in second grade again, and I am a 25-year-old man. So it does a really nice job of bringing you back to your childhood, looking at these terrifying negative space nightmares and remembering why they scared you in the first place.
Yeah, and if you are a more like diehard fan and you're just curious about like how they adapted it, is this just like an anthology? If you're not aware, the Goosebumps comparison is appropriate because in terms of like the basic plot, it's pretty much the same, except this one doesn't have R.L. Stine being played by Jack Black. So basically have a magic book that releases like the stories and the creatures of the Goosebumps-averse and the Scary Stories verse. And, they pick a couple of the more popular, like, famous stories from the collections and recreate them, but by having them sort of tied together with the book conceit, it works overall really well. It never felt out of place. It was really easy to appreciate each sort of spooky, scary moment as its own thing, especially, like, if you think about the source material, like, they're taking these from individual stories and kind of tying it together with these broader themes about storytelling. And yeah, it just overall worked really well. And I think it was a really smart choice for the adaptation, because I did a little bit of reading. And apparently Del Toro said, he was the producer on this, not the writer or the director.
Oh, you can still feel him in the movie, though.
There's one moment in particular where I had found myself questioning if he wrote or had a hand in the directing on this. But he said that an anthology, and this is an interesting thought. I don't know if I completely agree even, but I think it's shows that they were really putting a lot of thought into the project, that an anthology is only as bad as its worst sequence and never as good as its best sequence. Which I think as a human being, I tend to like the good sequences in individual things like that tend to stick out to me more. But, that is a danger.
That's a wild statement coming from someone on this podcast. The podcast that talks, well, this scene felt very bad to me. And let's harp on that for 3 hours.
That's fair. But usually that's in the context. I guess like you are right. I should clarify. I should bring up my shield before everyone attacks me. Given my history, usually when I harp on a scene, the Godzilla episode is a prime example. It's usually because like that's the scene that encapsulates like my fundamental problem with the overall story. However, when it comes to something that is more segmented, like say levels in a video game or like short stories in a collection, I'm actually pretty forgiving of like bad spots as long as the overall experience is mostly positive, like they're outweighed. So that's, I'm talking about collections here, anthologies. It's not the same as like a movie with a single narrative. Please don't bully me.
I mean, it kind of is though too, because like we do have forgiven a lot of like weak spots in movies if we liked the rest of it. Like we harp on those weak spots simply because they are easy to harp on in a lot of ways. Especially when they're like really jarring in comparison to the rest of the movie. Like we go out of our way to try and talk about good things in movies if we really like the movie. Like I don't think that there's really anything in this movie in particular that we're going to just sit there and be like, well, this fucking scene, it sucked for this reason. It's much more of like this is really good. Let's talk about the parts that are good. But like the unfortunate truth is that like if there is something that is bad in a movie, it's really easy to kind of like get focused on that because like it's kind of fascinating to unpack why this one scene in an otherwise good movie might not have worked.
I think that was a very succinct summary of the tightrope that we're walking here, and also because bad press means more clicks, generally speaking.
I mean, that's just confirmed. The problem is I'm not like titling our episodes like fucking scary stories to tell in the dark. Fuck kids, am I right? Granted, I feel like I probably have to name this that now, don't I?
You sure do. You're morally obligated. Let's get into spoilers.
Let's talk spoilers. But before we do, let's talk about what we're doing next week. And by talking about what we're doing next week, I mean just be incredibly vague about what we're talking about next week because we don't fully know what we're doing next week. Jackson is back at his mom's house, which means that he'll be in town with me this coming weekend, and we're going to pick something awful to watch, or something weird, or something different. Probably, basically what it boils down to, it's probably something that you don't care about, so, like, don't be as worried about watching it before we talk about it.
If you want some prep for what to expect, go listen to the Future World episode. One of our crowning achievements, I think.
That episode, I need to just start like tweeting that episode out more because that episode's fucking great.
So yeah, the Future World is the content that you didn't know you needed, and that's what we're hoping to bring to you next week. So get ready for that.
A good chance is 2019's Serenity with Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. I don't promise that that's what we're gonna do, but it's a possibility if you want to like hedge your bets. So let's talk spoilers of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Where do we want to begin? Do we want to start at the beginning? Like, does that feel like a good way of doing this?
Yeah, you know what? Sure. Why not?
So let's dive into why, despite the fact that I just said that we're not going to harp on bad things, the beginning kind of doesn't work as well as the rest of the movie.
And so the beginning, this is also appropriate because I think the beginning is emblematic of a lot of my overall problems. And it's that there's a lot of nice scenes and a lot of nice sequences and a lot of clever ideas, but the presentation can be very basic. And this is sort of what I said earlier, stealing from what Sean said in the pre-discussion to steal his thunder, about like when the movie dips between kind of high, like borderline R, terror, PG-13, and like low stakes, like YA 80s. It feels a lot like an 80s film, even though it's set in the 60s.
Well, it feels a lot like It Chapter 1, which is an 80s novel, so...
Yeah, an 80s novel set in, like, the late 50s, no less. So
yeah.
Not quite the 60s. But, yeah, so... and I think it's a good point of comparison, especially because, you know, we were pretty critical of it, but in this particular comparison, I'd say it comes out more favorably, because although Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is very good about its setting, and don't get me wrong, like, I'm a real sucker for, like, a period setting, especially, like, Cold War era, like, 60s Vietnam, and this movie's just dripping in that, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later. So, like, that's all very good, but I think what it had, and the thing that I enjoyed the most about that movie was, like, the chemistry between the kids, and how they behaved more like real kids than a lot of movies. Like, they still were maybe a little too quippy, but a lot of their concerns and a lot of their personalities were still very much like 12-year-old boys. Whereas the characters in the beginning of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark here are very stock. You have the nerd who's dressed as a clown and everyone makes fun of him, but he's a Poirot. And then you have like the loudmouth smartass kid, the you know, sister who's like vain and dating like the dickhead bully who's a complete fucking sociopath in the vein of an 80s movie. And, you know, the main characters, you know, the shy, like, writer girl, and their personalities don't ever really show beyond that. They're very much stock characters. And I think, for me, I wasn't super bored during the beginning just because I was appreciating the charm of, like, the period setting and kind of the comfiness of that, like, sort of dated, like, teen movie feeling that I just appreciate as an aesthetic. But it's not doing a lot of favors for you invested in the characters right off the bat.
No. The big thing that I kind of came away with from it is it almost had, like, a cabin in the woods feel to it. Which is just, like, such... I use this as a reference piece a lot because it is such an easy shorthand in horror movies for just stock characters that are there just to push the plot along. Which Cabin in the Woods eventually does things with those characters, but, like, early on, they are just stock characters for the sake of being stock characters, and that's the point of them. And, like, in this movie especially, they are all very much, like, just the nerd, the jock, the girl, the, you know, minority. Like, there they are. They're there. They're doing their required roles. And so for, like, the first half, you basically know all of what's happening. Like, there's not anything that really jumps out until, like, you get to the scary parts, and then things literally jump out. But building up to that, you're just watching cardboard standees of a character do, you know, what it does. This character is supposed to stand here and say this, and they do. About midway through, I've said it turns more into like a mystery and it becomes more engaging because like the plot takes over as opposed to being about characters. It becomes more about the actual plot and the mystery, and starts to work a lot better. But like that in and of itself really kind of shows how weak the characters are up to that point. That said,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say just as an aside because I have to throw in the fact that I laughed way too fucking hard at the kid when he gets his banana smushed. Like his sister, the goofy kid, his sister closes the door on him while he's eating a banana and just goes, "Oh, my banana!" And I was the only person in the theater to laugh, but I laughed so goddamn hard at this. I laughed for a good 30 seconds. I don't know what it was, but it was just, I think it was just the line of like, "Oh man, my banana." That was just so good. I was dying. Oh.
That's so beautifully on brand. Oh my god.
No, I was with Sam and she looked at me like, "What the fuck? That's not fun." I'm like, "Yes, it's so goddamn funny."
It took me a minute to even remember what you were talking
Exactly. It's a complete non-line. It's not funny, but for whatever reason, it just hit me in the exact way I needed it to, and it was very funny.
Well then, all right. So, speaking,
Of bananas, of course, right? Like,
speaking of bananas, and speaking of character stock archetypes, you will notice that one of the archetypes Sean dropped in there is the minority, which I would like to talk about for a bit. Because eventually it becomes clear like what the movie is trying to do and trying to say, but there are a couple like tugging at the shirt collar moments early on where you're like, okay, movie, like what are you doing here? Where like the so this moment really stood out to me. And this is, I mean, if we're talking about like nitpicks, this is pretty nitpicky in the grand scheme of things, but it definitely was a tugging at the shirt collar moment. So, the kids hide in Ramon, like the main, he's kind of like the main love interest boy for Stella, the main like writer girl, and they hide in his car to hide from sociopath Sandy, the bully, and he. Like, the two kids in the back, like, the loudmouth kid is like, oh, man, you gonna show me your switchblade? Like, where's your switchblade? He's like, what makes you think I know I have a switchblade? He's like, oh, man, he totally got one. And it's like, oh, there's 60s racism. We've already seen the interactions with the cop. Like, we know where the movie's going with this. But then, when we need them to open a door in the haunted house, lo and behold, he pulls out the switchblade after all and knows how to pick the locks. And I'm like, oh, no, movie, this is your Mexican character. Like, what are you doing?
yeah, the movie treads a line with race really well. Because like there are definitely a couple moments where you're like, ooh, please don't go where I think you're going with this. And for the most part, it does a really good job of subverting expectations. Because like the big mystery of the movie is the book of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is written by Sarah Bellows, who's like a dead ghost who's just basically expunging her rage through time in these terrifying ways of killing people. And there's a little bit there where they're in a library looking up clues, trying to figure out how this all fits together. And like they mention that the name of, I'm assuming she was a slave, but it's not explicitly stated. I don't know exactly where this takes place. So like,
oh, it was Pennsylvania, so probably not. Probably like
not a slave, right?
Yeah.
But like, it was clearly an African-American woman working for a rich white family. So, like, the living conditions aren't going to be great there either way. But then, like, I'm like, is the twist of this movie that it's not Sarah Bellows, but it's in fact this African-American woman who works here teaching them black magic? Because that's not a great look movie.
Definitely a lot of tugging at the shirt collar, and especially when that scene starts where they're like talking to her, and she's kind of like, she's kind of like blind, like she's got like the glassy eyes.
Well, that's her daughter. We should clarify. That's Lulu.
Oh, that's the daughter. Excuse me. But like, it seems like they're about to get some great profound wisdom, and I'm like, don't do this trope movie. Like, don't do it. Like,
yeah,
please. No, and they don't to their credit.
I was gonna say, I think like the variety of people who worked on this movie definitely kind of steered them away from some easy tropes that would definitely fall into the oh god no category, and like really helped me, like kept my enjoyment of the movie up. Because had it fallen into being like, oh, it was the African American woman teaching black magic, and of course it was because duh type of thing, that would have just been lazy, bad, and racist, and I didn't want that. So like when they kind of twisted it back around as like that was just a red herring, like I was more on board again. Like it kept kind of like pushing me the way of like, oh god, please don't, and then just kidding, we're fine, we're not actually gonna do that. Which like as I'm saying that, like that's kind of hinky itself, isn't it?
There's a reasonable debate to be had there, I think.
Yeah, no, like I don't necessarily want to have this debate. I don't think either of us are equipped to have this debate, other than to just kind of acknowledge that like playing with that trope can be a dangerous thing, especially when like this is a movie that like I feel like had it pushed itself into the R category, which it easily could have, except for the fact that like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark are books aimed at kids, so it makes sense to keep it PG-13. It could have. I could see it tackling those themes in a broader sense, but in the case of this, it doesn't really do anything with it. And I think that's where like kind of that hesitation of like, ooh, is that a little hanky kind of kicked in? But like, and I don't think either of us are equipped to really say.
No, but I think this launches off to a bigger point about like the themes that the movie has, and how I think they're good, smart themes, but like some of the execution is maybe just a little bit too basic. And so I think this is a good example in that, you know, sort of the twist. The movie that I was thinking about towards the end, it's very It Chapter 1 in the beginning, but towards the end, if you've seen Paranorman, this movie basically ends in the same way, in that you have the vengeful, like, spirit witch character, it turns out was, you know, misunderstood, sort of persecuted, and, like, has to be talked down from, like, all the evil stuff that they're doing now.
If you haven't seen Paranorman, just as a quick aside, you really should. That's one of my favorite movies.
It's a great fucking movie. Great Halloween flick. Life is wonderful. So, yeah, so that's basically the premise. And Sean, I feel like I should hand this off to you to the discussion of storytelling, because we've talked about like storytelling examinations like as a theme a lot recently. We talked about it with Dangan V3, we talked about it with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like this keeps coming up, and I feel like that this movie has a less masturbatory take on it that's worth discussing, and yet also I'm still critical of.
Yeah, I really liked how this one kind of dealt with writing and story as a narrative in a lot of ways. I think it's there's a very clear theme of, you know, stories have power and stories can change the world, and like by itself, that's yes, all right, cool. We talked about that very much with Danganronpa V3. But like, I'm not really gonna dive into that side of things because we've talked about it a lot. I want to take it a step further because I think like not only does this talk about the ability of stories to change the world, but it dives into the stories that we tell ourselves and how those reflect our own like views of ourselves. And I think that's really helpful. This could just like, I guess bearing my soul a little bit, like that's something that like I wrestle with, because like I get caught up in my own head and blame myself for things that I have no right to blame myself for. And so like, then, you know, I get more and more down on myself. So like this really resonated with me in a big way, because like it dives into like the fact that Sarah Bellos was persecuted for telling the truth. Like I love the fucking fact that their family is a paper mill company that poisoned like a bunch of kids. Like I don't love that part. Don't let me go back on that.
This is beating a dead horse, Sean. We want those kids to get poisoned.
I'm sorry. You're right. So like, in addition to the fact that all those kids died, the really
oh, please continue.
No, in addition to that, I do really like the fact that like this whole story is, you know, the people, these rich fucks just being like, hey, our daughter is ruining our livelihood. Let's condemn her to an insane asylum and like just treat her horribly. Like that's dark as fuck, but really it's good storytelling. It's good spookiness. And so like it's one of those things where she was right, but then she got so caught up in the fact that she was treated poorly, she became like the child killer that she was told she was. And like she became the stories that she was telling herself and the stories that other people were telling her. And it took our main character to come in and be like, hey, I'm going to tell the truth. And the truth is that this is not who you are. This is not what you did. And I think like, as powerful it is to be like, hey, stories can change our perception, I think it's also important to recognize that like the stories we tell ourselves are really important on how we view ourselves and those around us and how those view us as well. I think that's something that doesn't really get shown as much, because I think that there's a lot of like self-reflection it takes to do that. Like you have to have like like, this is gonna sound like I'm just like, hey, I'm just fucking tooting my own horn here, but like I think there's a certain level of like courage to come out and be like, hey, I talk bad about myself and it fucks me up. And so like for somebody to make a story where that is the premise of it, I think it's really good because it shows that like you're not alone in that situation, and it's something that should be talked about more often. And I like this a lot for having the courage to say it's not just the stories around us, it's the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah, and I think
I need to stop bearing my soul on this fucking podcast. I'm done.
Sean, we're nothing but apes dancing for the zoo. So I like that theme a lot, especially because it is, I'm sure that if I racked my brain, I could think of stories that address storytelling in this way, but it is certainly unique in stuff that's been coming out recently, stuff that we've been talking about. And it does make for a nice contrast from like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is definitely a lot more masturbatory in that like we're trying to reaffirm like the Hollywood system, which, for in the context of a bunch of actors being murdered because Charles Manson and his family had these ideas about movies or whatever, is perfectly valid, but stands to take. But there's a time and place for everything, and introspection is indeed important. And I think so. I like that this movie. It's about stories, but it's not just about like your stories can change everything and like you're the most specialist boy for being a writer, because that's so often what this sort of thing turns into.
But I am.
Back to the mines with you, Sean. Get back in the field. Harold's
the fucking
waiting.
Paper mill. Go drink the mercury water.
So, I do like that this movie is so focused on like the potential damages that stories can do in more ways than one. Like, the propaganda of the paper mill, that's one kind of damaging story.
And we're coming back to propaganda. I'm not like that. I went on a tear there. I'm not done.
No, my man Sean's come fully loaded. And
just like Herbie.
All right, Sean, you're done talking. You're canceled. It's over. But yeah, in addition to like sort of what Sean was saying about like the stories we tell ourselves, there's also this sort of broader propaganda theme. So Sean, why don't you just dive into that? Because I wouldn't even say it's a counterpoint because I agree with what you're saying, but I guess my criticism applies equally to both of these elements.
All right, so I'm just gonna take it right back from Jackson here. I tried to pass the ball off, and he's like, "I don't want this. Yeah, you take it back." So the other thing I want to talk about this movie that really heightened my love of it, and it was something that I wasn't really sure where it was going with at first because it kind of took a second to allow me to understand what it's trying to do. Because early on we get a sign that says Richard Nixon or Nixon Agnew, and like there's a swastika over it. And I'm like, all right, well that's, already I'm getting some parallels to modernity. And like, how this all fits together and like past and present combining and whatnot. But I was like, it may be just a little thing to throw away. But like as the film goes on, like there's more and more things. They're clearly trying to compare this 1968 election to today and like how everything goes. And it's 1968, right? 1969?
It's 68. I actually remember because my mom and I had a conversation about whether they got the date of the election wrong. And I'm pretty sure they said 68 at the beginning.
Okay, cool. Because I wanted to make sure on that one, because I have been known to get the years wrong all the time. So 1968 and like just the comparison between 1968 and today, and like it kind of goes on from there because like the Mexican kid comes in to town and like the police are immediately suspicious of him. He's like, hey, what's going on? Are you leaving? Are you staying? What's your deal? Already getting like that racial profiling of today. then like he's immediately called a slur, like a slur from the time. And then, you know, very comparable to today's slurs, and like there's all sorts of things woven throughout this movie that just are clearly designed to kind of correlate past and present, and it's really clever and really it's integrated really smoothly in a way that I think works to both heighten like the anxiety around the movie, because there's a little bit of social anxiety that runs throughout the entirety of it that like connects to today in a very serious way. So like you can feel what these kids are going through, and I think like it's one of those things where this story could be told just as easily today, but it works better in the 1960s just because of like the aesthetic. That said, it kind of takes the fact that there are these comparisons to today, as well as like such an emphasis on propaganda and how stories are told, and like the capitalist family that condemns their daughter and like all that good stuff, kind of really puts an interesting idea on like how stories represent propaganda and the quote unquote fake news and everything like that. And I think it's I don't know that it's necessarily trying to say something super deep with this, but more just like a, hey, check your fucking sources on shit. Like, make sure you do your research. Make sure everything's kosher with what people are saying. There are ways to spin the truth. There are lies that get perpetuated throughout the world. Check your facts. And I think it's a much more, it's subtext. It's definitely subtext throughout the movie. Like stories being powerful is overt, but like cutting it back and clearly being like, there's bullshit out there. Like the comparison of Trump and Nixon is clear and apparent, and like the idea of checking what that group of people is saying is very clear.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the, I mean, like, because they don't use Watergate as the background because he is being like this is around the time of the election, and you know Agnew's still around, and so like obviously Watergate's looming over, in addition to like Trumpgate, whatever you want to call like Epstein getting killed in prison before he can like reveal any information, in addition to all the other crazy bullshit that's been going on. I mean, man, Trump makes Nixon look like a little baby when it comes to corruption, but that's neither here nor there, I guess. And so I think that actually does tie into one of the things that I think the movie does very well, and one of the reasons that I appreciate period pieces in general when they are used to sort of comment on modern day issues like this, is that you're allowed, by commenting on the past, you're pretty much always commenting on the now, because if you study enough history, you will see that things are depressingly repeated over and over again, and nobody ever learns anything. And the same foibles that haunt us will continue to haunt us. And I think that's why I think that like this kind of message and this kind of subtext for me is often more effective when you do it through the lens of like commenting on another time that nonetheless applies to yours, because I think that makes any sort of critique hit home a little bit harder, and like, oh, like we haven't gone far at all. In fact, we've regressed in quite a few ways. Like, oh shit. But also just having it be less in your face. Like I was just talking about this today, and it's not a unique observation by any means, but like political satire is dead. Like you cannot make up anything more insane than like what is going on with the Trump administration right now. And so like already like political satire has the threat of being like thuddingly obvious and in your face, and even more so when you have a literal like cartoon character as the head of state. However, this is also my big criticism of the movie, because while I think particularly in like the historical details and keeping that as sort of the background, I think allows it to work really well, there are a lot of other times where the characters will just sort of turn directly to the camera and say, you see, Sarah, it was the evils of capitalism all along. And those are the moments where I just sort of sit back and I'm like, scary stories to tell in the dark. You're not wrong, but like, I wish you'd sell me on it a little more. I wish you'd weave your narrative webs a little bit and give me some character development and clever dialogue and
But
twists
also pass this truth on to the youngsters all the time. Retweet.
I was gonna try and come up with like some Soviet meme, but I can't off the top of my head. So pretend I said something clever about Marxism. Anyway, so yeah, and I mean, but like, and I think that's where the movie's at a weird crossroads, and that they are based on children's books that are still in print, probably still being sold at Scholastic book fairs to terrify generation after generation.
Just sitting there with those fucking those covers, man.
Those covers, the illustrations inside, like, no, absolutely not. Get them away from me. Stop. But, and that's just kind of where we slide more into, like, kid movie writing, which feels a little incongruous with a lot of the really, really well-done horror sequences. And I don't know. It's not, like, the worst thing in the world, necessarily. The movie's coherent, which is more than I could say for a lot of other things we've talked about. But it just, by kind of resorting, I mean, I think the most egregious example for me that illustrates the whole problem is when Stella has that conversation with her dad, who feels like he had a much bigger part in the movie in like a previous draft or something.
God, the dad part's a little weird.
Yeah, like I don't really get what's going on there. Like she like has guilt about her mom running off, but it's like really vague about like what went wrong and like it's not your fault and all this other stuff.
Listen,
and
I say lip service all the time on this fucking podcast. This is the goddamn definition of it.
It really is. And it's even stranger. I mean, this was just distracting to me because if you've watched Breaking Bad, the dad is played by an actor who played a major character in that show.
Oh no.
So, which is another thing that makes me think that like this was a bigger part originally, maybe. And so like I don't know what's going on with that dad subplot, but I do because he turns to the camera and says, "Hey, listen, you are good enough. You're my sweet baby girl, and mom didn't leave because of you, and it's not your fault, and you got to stop telling yourself this." Like, it's clear how it's supposed to fit in to the broader Sarah Bellows like narrative, but it's just done with so little finesse that it just stands out as weird and like even more kind of in your face than a lot of the other already kind of obvious moments are. And that's really my big overall gripe is that I think that this movie, like I was reminded a lot in parts of like The Shape of Water. And I've been trying to think about the distinction because Shape of Water is also pretty obvious. It's not exactly subtle about like kind of celebrating, people who are different or like marginalized or outcast from society. But I think a lot of it has to do with tone, and that Shape of Water so much, like aside from Michael Shannon's character, just was like kind of generally sweet. Like it was very nice, like comfy feeling kind of movie. Whereas this features a terrifying, like Guillermo del Toro woman, like surrounding you when you turn around a corner, constantly slowly approaching in a bright red room that you're fated to go into, and spiders crawling out of your giant boil, and a big toe in your stew, and it feels a little incongruous, to have it said so plainly in contrast to kind of the under your skin sort of horror that goes on in the like horror sequences.
I mean, I think that this really does just kind of boil back to the fact that like the horror sequences, like you add a little bit of blood and there are like the blood is the only thing that is keeping this movie away from being an R-rated movie.
Yes.
And the rest of it is definitely like hard PG, light PG-13 stuff. Like it never really, it feels very YA tropey. I kind of got like a Darkest Minds vibe from it a little bit.
Yeah, well, because it's like YA, but even like I'd say like speaking as someone who's pretty familiar with current YA, like it's got kind of a lighter touch even by the standards of modern
I was gonna
YA.
say like that's what I'm saying. Like hard PG even.
Yeah, for sure. Like middle grade almost.
Yeah, it's weird. But I want to before we wrap up, I have two things. First, and this is something I just want to touch on really quick because the other thing is the part that I actually want to talk about for a minute. The fucking sequel bait hook at the end fucking sucked.
Yes, it did.
That's all I have to say about that. It was stupid. It can fuck right off. If there's another one, I'll probably watch it. I'm not gonna lie to you about that. But like just the way the hook was like turned to the camera, come back for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark 2. And that was the end of that. I'm like, that was fucking bad. That was stupid. But no, I just as a final thing, I want to talk in spoilers about the horror. Because this shit was so fucking good. Like the Mitai Doti man was absurd. That was uncomfortable to like next degrees because it was just this dude who could fall apart at will. His bones cracked the entire time. Like it's wonderful, but so unnerving. And like I just want to talk about like the fucking creepy ass shit in this movie.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about favorite sequences. I have two thoughts while I've got like the ending and the Mitai Doti man on my brain. First, about the ending, man. Ramon got such a raw deal. Name a man who's gotten fucked over more by Vietnam. Anyone? The answer is anyone who died in Vietnam. but shit, dude.
I mean, he might have, and then he got the ultimate raw deal, huh?
I know, like it was kind of jarring, that it ends with him getting shipped to Vietnam because he was like a draft dodger. And I sat back and I thought about him, like, I mean, I guess that's realistic that he'd get shipped off, but damn, that's cold.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I mean, it's
I guess
supposed to be like the completion of his character arc of like, I'm not a coward anymore, so I'm going to Vietnam.
Which definitely feels incongruous with like the corrupt like Nixon administration like perpetuating this war that doesn't need to be perpetuated.
It
like,
honestly feels like the setup like for more in the sequel or something.
No, that's what I felt like too. But it definitely sat a little wrong with me. Like anyone who's like using Vietnam draft dodger as like an insult in this day and age needs to get their fucking head checked.
Yeah. But like that was bad, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. It's the part that, like I really liked it. And then Ramon got shipped off, and I'm like, that was weird, but fine. And then the last part, like I'm just fuck it.
No. But the Mitai Doti man, that I gotta say, filmmakers take notes. They made a great tense sequence with a lot of nice body horror. And they even had a doggo. They had a doggo present on the scene, and they did not kill the doggo, and that's what's important here. And they didn't need to do that. He just scampered off.
Yeah.
And lived to bork another day.
And you know what? It showed everything that was tense, and they killed the cop instead. Which all right, cool. So like it's fuck, man. That whole Mitai Doti man scene was just unnerving as fuck. The bone creaking.
For me, the standout scene was the Red Room. I really, really liked the design of the pale lady. Like you could feel Del Toro's fingers all over that one. Like
remember her from childhood, honestly.
Oh really?
Yeah.
It's like exact.
Like
it's
close enough, but I'm sure Del Toro like did some work to bring her to the screen.
That fucking rules. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great design, like the, maybe this is just me, but like that anxiety of being trapped, like of just turning the corner, like that hopelessness of her like slowly waddling toward you, that inevitable doom. Oh my God, that shit. Ugh. And the fact that like it was played up so much in the preceding scene, like this is what I mean when I say a lot of the, like the horror segments themselves are really, really clever. In that like it's appropriate that, you know, he gets the like most impending of impending dooms. Like all of them are fated in one way or another because they're written in the story. But he is going out of his way. Like they're going into the record room to like listen to the archives and figure out what's going on with Cerebellus. He's like, fuck that. Like I'm gonna change my fate. And then he leaves and goes the other way and like has a chase through the hospital and is like sick. And then the lights go red around him and he just immediately knows he's fucked and there's nothing he can do about it except watch the pale lady like waddle towards him. Oh, it's such good shit.
That's one of those scenes actually. Like I said, I watched this with Sam, where we left and we were kind of talking about that scene. She's like, I didn't really get much out of that scene. Like it was creepy, but like the other ones were so visceral and like you could feel the fear with them. But that one didn't really get me in the same way. And it was one of those things where I'm like, I agreed with her, but it was only for a little bit because initially I'm like, this isn't as bad. And then I kind of like stopped for a second. I'm like, put myself in place of Chuck. There's a kid who got trapped there. Put myself in his shoes, and my anxiety level just fucking skyrocketed because suddenly I saw all they were doing for that slow move, seeing her wherever you look, and like just looking through the camera as it comes around and everything. I'm like, oh god, it's so nerve-wracking. It's like watching walls come in really closely. And I think like I was talking to her about this too. Like I think part of the reason that it might not have hit her in the same way is because if you don't have claustrophobia, or even if you have light claustrophobia, I don't think it hits in the same way because you're looking down hallways and they still look open. And so like, because I am claustrophobic, but like that was my thought. I'm like, oh, there's still openings in the hallway. And it wasn't until I realized that like, no, there's not. Like it's there, but there's no way you're getting around her. You're fucked. That like the anxiety started to hit because like if you're just kind of like, oh, it's an open hallway, what can happen? It's not like an elevator or something, which is what Sam originally thought was going to happen with the Red Room because when he got in the elevator. So it's interesting.
I would not describe myself as a particularly claustrophobic person. However, I think this movie nonetheless did a really great job of evoking claustrophobia, like not just in that scene, but like when the nerdy kid hides under the bed and like he like slowly creeps up and the corpse lady is just shuffling around and when they're even locked in the room at the beginning when sociopath Sandy seals them in the mansion. A lot of great usage. I mean, like that's really what pushes this like sort of over the top, in addition to just like memorable monster designs and like good visuals and production, is just like that staging, that ability to make you feel trapped in the scene, like no matter where you are, is really fucking great.
And like I just as another quick aside, because I'm apparently just gonna keep coming up with things to talk about. Like we're brushing right up against that hour mark, but like I'm just I there's a lot I can gush about with this movie because I like it a lot in a lot of ways. It's just a shame about that first half. But like this movie does has a reliance on jump scares in a couple places, but like it uses them well in a way that I didn't dislike, because like I've gone on record of being like I don't like jump scares, but like I think because we've been watching a lot of horror movies on the podcast, just a lot recently, and it's kind of weird, but like this movie handles them in a way that like kind of recontextualized how I feel about jump scares in a lot of places, because it no longer feels like this movie in particular didn't really, it wasn't predictable like It Chapter 1 where I'm like, and jump scare and jump scare and jump scare. This movie I was kind of like, and jump scare, and then it wouldn't be it. I'd be like, okay, jump scare, jump scare, jump scare, and then it would jump scare. Like it knew how to play with your emotions, so like you knew it was coming, but it kind of still kept you on edge in a different way, and like played with your emotions in a very interesting way that didn't leave you just, I know it's coming. This is more annoying than anything. You're just trying to spike my adrenaline in really lazy ways. Like it was atmospheric enough and like built up what was happening around the jump scare enough that the jump scare felt like an earned payoff rather than just lazy adrenaline spikes.
You know what, Sean? That was very well put. I was actually very curious while I was watching this when it dawned on me how jump scare heavy it was. I'm like, there are a lot of things I can see Sean enjoying about this, but I don't know how he's gonna feel about all these. And that was well said.
Thank you. I try. I've actually thought a lot about this movie over the past day and a half, because there's a lot to unpack with it for me. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap here?
I'm pretty tired. I think it's time to go to the dark and hear some scary stories in the dark. Don't talk to me in the dark, please. I'm scared.
That was fucking nothing. Like, I was listening to this, I'm like, what the fuck can I do to play off this? And I'm like, nothing. He's backed himself into a corner. Go hide in your closet.
My only defense is I saved it for the end instead of the beginning this time.
Well, I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. You can find me on Twitch over at twitch.tv/helpus_Skippy. I'm streaming all the time over there. We're playing Persona 4. We're playing Mario Maker 2. We're playing Pokemon Emerald as a Nuzlocke run with Jackson over here. We're doing Divinity Original Sin 2s on Sunday mornings, and we're doing Jackbox and Smash on Sunday nights. It's a lot of great fun, and you should come hang out and play with us and chat with us. Oh, you can also get my work at 25yearslatersite.com. I'm doing recaps weekly every Wednesday for the final season of Preacher, so keep an eye on that. Preacher's a great show, and I'm really excited to watch the finale. So,
hell yeah. And I've been Jackson Keller. You can find me at twitch.tv/JacksonJKeller. We're officially back, boys and girls. We got a new setup. We're in the garage. We're garage streaming, but we got dog cam, and we're going to be playing Mario Maker as well. I'm taking a break from Smash for a bit. I'm getting too angry at it. And we're going to be playing some more Fire Emblem, Nuzlocks with Sean on Wednesdays, more shit with my pal Connor at twitch.tv/Genghis_Con_ whenever. It's going to be great stuff. We've entered a renaissance of content, and you should be here for it.
Like my motto says, content and suffering. If you want to get in contact with the podcast or just kind of keep an eye on what we're doing, you can follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. I mostly just tweet out links and updates for like when there's bonus episodes and other of that sort. I occasionally make jokes, and like if I see something come up on Netflix, like for fun fact, Hurricane Heist is available on Netflix right now. You should watch the first 5 minutes and then turn it off.
You know what? That's much better advice that I was going to give, because I was going to say, don't you dare even think about turning Hurricane Heist on for 1 second, you fool.
I did. I was on vacation with some friends, and I put it on. I'm like, all right, listen, we need to watch the first 5 minutes because it's absurd.
You are right. You are correct in this. The first 5 minutes are very funny. No further, though. Find the hub gif.
Forgot that the dad gets just trucked by a fucking water tower, and like we were dying.
He doesn't just get trucked. He doesn't just get yeeted. He doesn't just get blown the fuck out. He gets annihilated.
It's ridiculous. It's the first when you see the title. When the title Hurricane Heist comes up, you're done. Turn it off. There's nothing left for you to see. And actually, if you'd like to find out more about things that are available online, and like when I somehow coincidentally find that Agent Cody Banks is showing on HBO, after I talk about Agent Cody Banks for the first time anyone has ever talked about Agent Cody Banks since 2001. I think I willed it into existence.
I just want to say that you found this like while I was in the middle of moving, and I looked at it, and like it took me some time to process what I was even looking at or what you were even talking about. Oh my god.
Well, if you want updates like that, you can join our Discord by signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/BADHcast. There is no underscore on that one because my consistency is for hot garbage. I did not, in fact, get time to change either of those handles, so I guess fuck it, we're stuck with that. But for only $1 a month, you can get access to our Discord and yell at us way more directly than on Twitter. Actually engage with conversation with other people on the Discord and have a good old time. At $5 a month, you can get access to all our bonus episodes. We did the Night of the Comet recently. That was a great fucking episode. All of our episodes for bonus content have been just complete fucking bangers. They're wonderful. They're so good.
You're missing out if you're not a patron. We're at 5 episodes all gold now?
Yeah, some around 5. Yeah. And they're fucking great. Also, at $10, you can tell us what bonus episodes you want us to do. So, $10 a month, and you can make us watch literally any movie you want. That's a dangerous precedent for us. But you can do it. You also get a little bonus thing.
And that bonus thing is this, a special shout out. Thank you to Mom. I'm still giving you this thank you, even though you've got a segment on the show now. Feel good. Thanks for birthing me, Mom. And also to Julia, Travis, and my Aunt Summer. Y'all are great. Thanks for your patronage. We couldn't do it without you.
Also, thanks to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out. They're on Spotify, all the other places you can get music. Listen to them, buy their albums. Any way you can support them is wonderful. Also, thanks to 25 Years Later, site.com for the endorsement. It's a bunch of really talented people doing a bunch of really talented writing, far more talented than I am. They're covering news. They're covering video games. They're covering movies. They're covering TV. They're covering everything that you could possibly want from one convenient news site. Please go click on their links, read their articles, read my articles too. Next week, we're not really sure what we're talking about. As we said, we might be talking about Serenity. We might find some other terrible, terrible movie to watch. Fuck it, we might watch Elf Bowling, the movie, because that's a thing that exists. So,
where's the pickle? That's the surprise.
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go